The Denver Broncos offense had a big day on Saturday, leading to a big walk-off touchdown. What happened during Saturday's Broncos camp? Well, you get that and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
The Denver Broncos offense and Russell Wilson, led by Jerry Jeudy, stack 2 consecutive big days at Broncos camp. Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day. You can get this podcast for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So do us a favor, hit that subscribe or that follow button down below so you never miss out on a day's worth of Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more. Every single day, all year long. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. Joined alongside, as always, by my co-host, Sayre, Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. This episode of the show is brought to you by our good friends of their eBay Motors. A championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. So for parts that fit, head to eBay Motors and look for the green check. Stay in the game with eBay Guaranteed Fit, ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Sayre, one thing we always talk about in the NFL, regardless of offense, defense, structure, around this time at training camp, we're always trying to look for that buzzword called stacking days. And the Broncos offense from Friday to Saturday, they stacked 2 impressive days back-to-back where they were able to generate some momentum, score some touchdowns, move the ball against the Broncos defense. That is a promising sign as the Broncos continue to build and get through their install here with Sean Payton. 2 good days in a row in Dove Valley here for the offensive side of the ball and Russell Wilson.
Absolutely huge for those guys, right? After we had talked about on this show, kind of just not wanting to hear about maybe Sean Payton just feeling good about the offense, right? But actually seeing them, or you people like you with boots on the ground, seeing them have good days, hearing the reports coming out of practice being like, yeah, the offense did look good today. No more of this defense winning. We kind of even boiled it down to, it can't just be Russell making a throw against tight coverage and it was just great defense. It has to be the offense actively going out there and winning a practice or 2, winning periods in practice, especially when you're looking to put up points, as we've seen the last handful of days. 2-minute drill, red zone work, and this need a touchdown period in which it sounds like Russell made some really big time throws.
He did. And look, this was the move the ball, need a touchdown period. They had the need a field goal period prior to it. The offense didn't do a good job in that one. The defense flustered them a little bit. Felt like there was a really good catch by Marquez Callaway from my vantage point with Jaquan McMillan in coverage. He caught it, but the referee said he was out of bounds. It would have moved the chains for a first down. So that's what ended that drive right there for them. But the second one where you need a touchdown, where you're trailing in a game, I believe it was 52 or 58 seconds left, 1 timeout. Russell Wilson marched the Broncos offense downfield, and he had several good throws. He connected with a running back out of the backfield, but then he dialed up some passes to Brandon Johnson, who continues to make plays in Broncos camp. Marquez Callaway getting involved in the mix. And then the play of the day, and maybe the play of the entire training camp for the offensive side of the ball to end practice that let Broncos fans go wild that were in attendance there. Jerry Jeudy running downfield with Damari Mathis, Titan coverage on it. Jeudy kind of lays out a little bit, hauls it in. It's a touchdown to end practice from 47 yards out. And in a situation like that, Russell Wilson would have led what we would call a game-winning drive there. But against a very aggressive defense that sent a lot of pressure, Russ, once again, getting the ball out of his hands quickly, Sayre. That's been the theme so far here in Broncos camp. And yeah, there's some moments throughout practice and team period where the defense will maybe, win a rep or make things a little bit more difficult. But Russ and the offense, they've bounced back in a big way. And it doesn't only just extend in that big period to Jerry Jeudy, which you love to see Jerry, his name being called a little bit. Kind of been a quiet camp, and it's not necessarily a bad thing that you haven't heard his name called quite a bit. It's the offense going through their installation period. So that, I think, is the primary focus. But can we also talk about the red zone period? What did Sean Payton say the other day, Sayre, about it? He said it was average at best, and they need to continue to work on it. Well, the Broncos, they did red zone here once again. In the first play of the red zone period, you saw Zach Allen getting his hands up, deflecting a pass, and then knocking it into the air. Russell Wilson went, and he got it there. But from that point forward, they locked in. They got some stuff going, and Russ obviously connected with Samaje Perine out of the backfield for a nice catch and run. And then on the very next play, Russ threw a touchdown to Brandon Johnson As Jonathan Cooper was barreling pressure around him, was about to get him, Russ stepped up, dipped his shoulder, and threw it to Brandon Johnson for the touchdown. Then you want to know a little bit of a wrinkle? They went for two, and he found Samaje Perine for a 2-point conversion there. So I think overall an efficient day for the offense. This is the stuff that you need to consistently see, right? Taking strides. Now, there's going to be times, as we've talked about here, the defense will get the best of the offense. It's not always going to look pretty, but these 2 days, for the Broncos, as they'll be off on Sunday, back on the practice field on Monday, the offensive side of the ball needed 2 practices like this, more things to build off of.
Yeah, exactly, Cody. And I think there's even a few notes within those that description that you just gave of that session right there. A couple things that really stand out to me. A batted pass by Zach Allen. I don't want to overrate this by any means, but he did spend the last 2 years learning from JJ Watt down there in Arizona playing with the Cardinals. And that was something that JJ Watt, absolutely, he pulled out that Mutombo finger shake. And that's something that I think really, it's a way for defensive linemen when you don't get home, you can still impact passing plays positively. You're not necessarily always creating pressure, collapsing the pocket. You can impact passing plays in a variety of different ways. And I think that's something that JJ Watt, that's what really made him a defensive MVP, right? He was collapsing the pocket, as well as if he's not getting home in the pass rush, he's knocking that ball away. So really, it's a great thing to hear that from Zach Allen, but it's also very interesting. Brandon Johnson continues to get a lot of run with this top Denver Broncos offense. So the stock there, I would say, is continually moving up, but also, I mean, maybe not even a question at this point of whether or not he's going to make the team, especially given the fact the team lost Tim Patrick to injury, had to waive KJ Hamler with the heart condition. So Brandon Johnson, it feels like to me, may be a roster lock at this point.
And I think that as well as he's just kind of pieced things together here, it's been nice to see Brandon Johnson's growth. I mean, last year, what was he, Sayre? He was the training camp star, the training camp darling, also in the preseason. And it was really that ankle injury that kind of derailed things a little bit, because we had talked about it. Remember last year during the preseason, we're like, oh yeah, Brandon Johnson, roster lock, had the ankle injury. They went with the injury settlement there. He came back onto the practice squad. I think the one thing I'm curious to find out a little bit about Brandon Johnson is what has changed in his preparation from last year to this year. Anytime you're an undrafted guy, you have a chip on your shoulder, but how has he been able to pick up Payton's offense and accelerate a little bit? Because I think you can make a drastic argument here. I've been watching practice there, and he's been a little bit more involved in the offense than Marquez Callaway. I mean, in terms of first opportunities here, but he and Callaway, in my opinion, Sayre, they have had some really, really under the radar practices. I think they've been tremendous pickups when we talk about Callaway, but also Brandon Johnson returning. And because of Tim Patrick's injury, it has changed the way that we view the wide receiver position, right? I think you and I can sit here and say, okay, if you look at the Broncos receiver depth right now on paper, aside from Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, the potential of Marvin Mims, Denver doesn't have a lot of known names or big names, at least on paper. But that actually could be a good thing, because Denver could very well have 2 to 3 guys behind those key guys that could elevate their names in a big way this upcoming season.
That's right. And that would be hugely helpful, wouldn't it? Because we've been wanting to see that group, that Tim Patrick said this could be the last dance this year. Well, we never really got to see that group. Hardly, I think 2 games is what I recently heard or read somewhere, Cody, with that quartet of Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, and KJ Hamler together on the field. It just never happened. So the Broncos really do need other guys, especially these maybe unheralded players, to really step up. This is an opportunity for a guy like maybe even like a Taylor Grimes. I heard his name get brought up at a recent Sean Payton press conference as well. Maybe that was even you, Cody, who asked that question. I can't really hear who's asking the questions, but regardless, Taylor Grimes, a guy who was maybe number 90 out of 90 on the roster, gives him an opportunity to maybe make some noise in camp and preseason and maybe make the roster. So very interesting stuff at a position where the Broncos really need some clarity.
They do need clarity with some of the depth there. And even Sean Payton has kind of offered a little bit of a glimpse into the future that not only they're evaluating their roster, they're evaluating 31 other teams, 90-man rosters right now once roster cuts do happen here. But speaking of players who need to continue to step up and elevate themselves, not first-team players, what about the Broncos' second-team unit, third-team unit? Who are some guys who have stood out consistently through week 1 of Broncos camp? Sayre and myself, we're going to dive deeper to that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there, Underdog Fantasy. August is here, and you know what that means. The NFL season is fast approaching. Preseason starts up this week, and it's also the official start of fantasy football drafting month. Get championship ready for your home league by trying out Best Ball on Underdog Fantasy. All you do is one live snake draft where there's no waivers and there's no trades. And Underdog, they'll go through and they'll set your best lineup every single week. So try it out with Underdog's Best Ball Mania Tournament. It's the largest fantasy football contest of all time, and it's back, and it's bigger and better than ever with $15 million of total prizes that are up for grabs, including an absurd $3 million going to the winner. So make sure you get involved in that action over there with Underdog Fantasy. And last year, the winner, they drafted their team in July. So don't wait around. Go get started here today. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com or find them in the App Store and sign up with promo code Locked On. It's one word, Locked On, to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code Locked On.
A handful of second-team players are making a lot of noise at Denver Broncos training camp, and we're going to get into that. But before we do, from Cody and I, we got to say thank you. A huge mile-high salute to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day, wherever and however you listen to your podcast. Or if you watch us on YouTube, thank you so much for doing that and helping us get over that 10,000 subscriber mark this year. Cody and I are super proud of that, and we're super proud to share that accomplishment with every single one of you. And for all of those who would say, hey, I'm an everyday listener of Locked On Broncos, we appreciate you so much, and we're excited to be able to continue to unpack Denver Broncos training camp and talk about all these different players that are making a splash, making an impact. Of course, in segment one, we touched on Russell Wilson, the starting offense, really having a great finish to practice. But what about some second-team players, Cody, that are standing out here as we approach we're really less than a week from the Broncos' first preseason game at this point, right? So some second-team guys are going to get opportunities to maybe get into that rotation now. Who are some second-team guys that fans should be kind of keeping their eyes on this week as we approach preseason week number one?
Yeah, this is a great question. There's several names that we're going to throw out here, and I do want to pinpoint. I think I've talked about a little bit, maybe in an episode early on in the week, but I love how Sean Payton and his coaching staff are mixing and matching guys with first, second, third team units. It's not necessarily, okay, this guy's with the third team unit, this guy's with the second, but they're getting reps all across the board here as Sean Payton wants to maximize the overall volume of reps that these guys get. And he wants to see what some guys can offer against maybe some starting caliber players here. That's how they're evaluating things here. But first name that I'll throw out here for Broncos country that I think has had a terrific camp so far through the first week, under the radar, Jaquan McMillan, obviously the cornerback who was undrafted out of East Carolina. You look at what he's done, his growth trajectory a little bit, going from training camp last year. I don't think there was much buzz about Jaquan last year during training camp, but so far this year, there is a ton of buzz. I had a chance to have an exclusive one-on-one interview with him, part of Mile High Sports, and this is a dude who all last season, Sayre, had told me, even though he was on the practice squad and even though he knew he wasn't going to play, he studied, he took notes, he was in the film room, he understood the opponent, the game plan every single week in case his number was called. And sure enough, at the end of the year, his number was called. He stepped up in a big way against Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, and the Los Angeles Chargers there. But, you know, for a guy like Jaquan McMillan, I think so far in camp, he's added some muscle. He still moves really, really well, but he's just been technically sound so far. And from a secondary standpoint, I think he's had a terrific training camp. He's one name that I would say that's been heavily involved, rotating between the ones, twos, and the threes in different situations. He's been a guy that's just been consistently impressive at camp.
And you love to hear that, right? Because obviously Riley Moss now injured, we know, for a handful of weeks here. The Broncos did bring in a veteran, Fabian Moreau, to maybe kind of fill that spot on the roster. But I think if Jaquan McMillan can play, that's the ideal situation for the Broncos to kind of bring, you know me, I'm as far as team building goes, I like the homegrown guys. So if you can develop guys in-house, bring those guys up from within your program, that's huge to me. So I love that. What about the wide receiver position, though? As we talk about some former Saints, Marquez Callaway, Lil Jordan Humphrey, there was a comment that Sean Payton made a couple of days ago where he kind of said he was looking for a little bit more out of those former Saints players. What's your thoughts and takeaways on where those guys have been kind of in the early goings here of camp as they transition from being Saints to now Broncos?
I think there's been a little bit of an adjustment period, which isn't a bad thing, right? I think for the most part, these guys have never played at altitude. So for them, I think adjusting to altitude and look, if you've been at practice, folks, you know how hot it's been in the mornings there. I think there's been an adjustment period, but in my opinion, Marquez Callaway's had a very, very consistent under the radar training camp here for the Broncos, whether he's catching passes from Russell Wilson in the final move of the ball period. He had 2 receptions in that instance there, but also contributing to guys like Jarrett Stidham and Ben DiNucci coming up with big plays in the passing game. We've seen that from Marquez Callaway. Little Jordan Humphrey's also been a little bit of a downfield threat so far in Broncos camp. Now, during Saturday's practice, when the second team was doing some red zone stuff, but in terms of little Jordan Humphrey, we've seen him downfield on some plays here for the Broncos offense. On Saturday, Delonte Hood made a terrific play in coverage against him, preventing what would have been a touchdown for the Broncos second team offense. But I feel for the most part, they've started to progress. They've started to pick things up, and their size is absolutely noticeable. When you look at Marquez, his size, his ability, he's got some nice twitchy traits to him. Little Jordan Humphrey, he's a big target. So continuing to stack on those performances, those guys have been impressive. But Sayre, I think really the one thing that we need to be talking about with second, third team type guys, that running back 3 competition, it is going to be very intense. And in my opinion, it's going to come down to the wire here between Tyler Beatty, Jaleel McLaughlin, and Tony Jones Jr. has been making some more flashes at camp as well.
Well, I know as we approach this game against Arizona, this is going to be one of my big storylines. So, spoiler alert for later in the week, I guess, or next week, whenever we get a chance to go through our biggest storylines for this first preseason game. The running back 3 position is one of those battles on the roster where I think right now it's fascinating because you have just 3 guys competing, whereas normally I think you would typically have like 5, maybe even sometimes 6 guys at the back end of your roster there at the running back position fighting for one spot or maybe 2 spots. Jaleel McLaughlin, Tyler Beatty, they seem to bring the biggest, different element to the offense compared to guys like Samaje Perine and, of course, Javonte Williams. But Tony Jones Jr. does have experience in the Sean Payton offense, so that could play into his favor hugely as we get to the preseason and you get to see these guys as we talk about. Pads come on, everything changes. Well, in the preseason games, everything changes as well because all of a sudden a guy who hasn't been getting a ton of headlines or publicity like Tony Jones Jr. could all of a sudden maybe have a big game in the preseason and really turn things around for his roster chances.
And I would say in the past 2 days when the offense has played better here for the Broncos, Tony Jones Jr. has been a guy who's been making some plays for, the first, second, and third team units and some of the spurts that he's been in, including a rushing touchdown in Saturday's practice with Jarrett Stidham there. So something to monitor here. But what are some other Broncos news and notes, including a period where Russell Wilson, the Broncos offense, were really cooking early on in Saturday's practice? You'll get that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Real quick, thank you so much for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day. But for your second listen of the day, make sure you go check out the Locked On NFL podcast, where you can get that wherever you get your podcasts, or also available on YouTube for all the latest news around the NFL from the local experts on the biggest stories. The Locked On NFL podcast has you covered. Russell Wilson, the Broncos offense, had not only an efficient performance to end practice, but overall they had a very efficient practice from start to finish, and including one important period that the Broncos need to work on to get their chemistry and timing. They excelled in that period. Thank you so much, Broncos Country, for tuning in, making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. We appreciate you so much for making this part of your daily routine. We love interacting with you in the comment section on YouTube or on social media. If you're following us on X, or as we call it, Twitter, at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos here. Let's go through another period here of the offense, Sayre, where I felt like it was a much-needed, efficient performance, and we'll dive a little bit deep into it. 7-on-7. Everybody asked the question about 7-on-7, and I think you can make the arguments, how valuable is it in the long run? Is there anything meaningful you can really take away from it? Not necessarily from a performance standpoint, but Sayre, 7-on-7 is very valuable and fundamental in the sense that you work on, as if you're on the offensive side of the ball, your quarterback and the receivers, they work on their timing, their spacing, their route concepts. And for the secondary and the defensive guys, it allows you to understand how a working communication with different routes that you're going to see, making sure that, hey, a corner and a linebacker or a nickel guy, they have proper communication and they can change or communicate something pre-snap to adjust their coverage, or even that, just getting to your drops against a passing look because there's no run threat. So it's keeping you honest if you're an inside linebacker in terms of taking your read step, then reacting. there's value to it. But Russell Wilson, the Broncos offense, Sayre, they were perfect in that period, the first team offense. Russell Wilson had a pass to Cortland Sutton to open things up for 10 plus yards that moved the chains. Then his next pass was to Kendall Hinton. One after that was to Albert Okwuegbunam for a 10 plus yard catch and run. And then Russ found Jerry Jeudy probably about maybe 6 or 7 yards, and Jerry Jeudy maneuvered, outran the defense, and did the work on his own after that. These are positive things that you want to see, is just working the different route concepts, your timing, and also for Russ being able to see, like, okay, against this coverage, here's where I'm going. I felt like that was a really good period, and the Broncos rode that momentum into the team period toward the end of practice. So I think those are strides you want to hear about, that you want to keep seeing. Will they do that on Monday? There was also a great question. Can they stack 3 practices in a row?
Right. And I think that's what everybody's going to be wondering now with the day off on Sunday, of course. But Cody, here's the question that I would have, being that I'm not able to be there and see it, and you're able to see what's going on. And obviously, compared to last year, here's the concerns, right? The concerns last year was that Russ didn't quite have I mean, I guess I don't want to just blanket it with this kind of statement, but it felt like the offense was discombobulated. He didn't seem to have a great grasp on the offense, or Hackett, or really anyone having a great grasp on what is the identity of the offense. Russ didn't seem to be playing confidently. He didn't seem to be necessarily firing the ball with confidence quickly out of his drops, things like that. Really just being decisive with the football. I suppose in terms of being confident in the offense and feeling more comfortable, or observing it as him feeling more comfortable and being decisive with the ball. Would you say that's kind of been the case for Russ here at training camp lately? Is that he's being more decisive, he's looking comfortable in the offense? Or do you think it's just, hey, they're just out there executing better, the timing is better? What would you maybe attribute that to? Because I think there's a lot of different layers to this, rather than just, people may be wondering, like, well, okay, yeah, so that he made some throws out there, but what substantially has improved that we can have confidence going into this season? Of those categories, do you think Russ is kind of excelling?
I think both, a little bit of both there. Now, look, Russ is doing all of this, and the offense is doing all of this while counteracting a very aggressive pass rush. I mean, Vance Joseph, he's sending different pressure looks, and I can't go into details to what exactly he's doing, but the Broncos' healthy front seven, I mean, it is tough. Against, I don't care who you are, any team is going to struggle with that if these guys stay healthy. They're going to have some good back and forth with some teams this upcoming season. Health is obviously the biggest question, the biggest factor there. So I think those things considered, I think Russell Wilson has done a pretty fantastic job with navigating that, being more decisive. I mean, there is times where, hey, I'm watching a reps there and the coverage is great to the point, okay, you initiate scramble drill or you use your legs to get going. Russ has done that while evading guys like Jonathan Cooper, Nick Bonito. Now, those guys have gotten some of theirs in terms of what would be a sack on Russ or some other quarterbacks, but that's where we've seen the progression in the last few days here from the offense. They look much more comfortable right now than they did day one of Broncos camp. So promising things to build off here overall for them. We'll see if they can continue to stack that. I mean, this upcoming week, Monday's practice is open to the media only. I think Tuesday and Wednesday will be open to the public. They travel on Thursday, play on Friday. And of course, we're going to have Broncos fans covered with a post-game report, a game preview, biggest storylines to watch this week, practice recaps, all that noise here, Locked On Broncos. But I feel like we should also get to some housekeeping items here for the Broncos. It was interesting on Saturday, no Frank Clark seen at practice. He was the only player not in attendance, which is a little odd because on Friday, we didn't see him at first, but then he came out a little bit later. Today, we did not see him. Sean Payton was asked after practice in his press conference whether or not he's going to participate on Monday's practice. And Sean Payton says, I think so. Like, he believes that Clark will be there. We don't know if there's anything going on, if he's dealing with anything along that lines, but it's very, very interesting to see maybe kind of play out where he's been. And also to that same point, Randy Gregory, a little bit on the side field on Saturday's practice. And what happened was, Sean Payton, he tells us, I'm never going to talk about injuries, but he told us a little something. So apparently on the interception, the pick six that he had during practice on Friday when the Jonathan Harris batted the ball up into the air during the move the ball period the first time, apparently he rolled his ankle after jumping up to go pick the interception off. So he participated in limited capacity on Saturday. He was in his team position specific drills alongside Justin Simmons as well. Kind of had a little bit of a rest day in between, no extensive teamwork for him during Saturday's practice. But Aside from all that, Sarah, I mean, Sean Payton wants to be smart with guys who are maybe dealing with a couple of bumps and bruises, which I think is the right course of action right now. Because think about it this way: if these guys were banged up and Payton was making them go out there and do things, and all of a sudden one of them got hurt again, everyone would be like, "Well, this is another major injury. How come you're not taking care of these guys?" Sean Payton, I think the vibe that I've gotten, you can tell that he truly cares about making sure that players are healthy, and they have all this advanced data that they use to track, the wear and tear on players, and that factors into their decision to give them either a vet day off or to rest them or just to put them in a limited capacity. So I'd say these are some things to monitor, but hey, game week's approaching, my friend.
It is, Cody, and what you just said about the pass rushers gets me thinking. I mean, Baron Browning is on the mend. Frank Clark, we don't know exactly what the situation is. Randy Gregory may have a little situation there. Obviously, the top free agent pass rusher, Yannick Ngakoue, he's off the board now. He went to the Chicago Bears. We'll kind of see, maybe monitor. Do the Broncos bring guys in to look at? I mean, if anything is really that serious, I guess we don't know at this point, but you certainly wouldn't want to even go into even a question of going into week 1 of the regular season without your top 3 rushers off the edge. So hopefully the Broncos are doing their due diligence. Got the off day Sunday. We'll kind of see, maybe they do some roster shuffling, or maybe not. But I think that just kind of raises a little bit of a red flag for me as you say that about those 2 guys in particular, especially with Baron Browning already in recovery mode.
I'll tell you this, like I don't have any concern about that right now. I think with Frank Clark, I don't think it has anything to do with injury status. I think that James Palmer of NFL Network did report something that Frank Clark does have like a history of like something wrong, like some stomach issues that make him get violently sick. I mean, I'm not saying hopefully that's the case, but I mean, if you're hoping if he's missing practice, hopefully it's just something that, the team is already aware about in a sense like that. So that has been something that I've just recently been made aware of by other people. So we'll see how things kind of formulate there with him. Browning is making good progress here, but man, I think you're getting a more extended look at guys like Nick Bonito, Jonathan Cooper, Aaron Patrick's looking very solid. You have your undrafted guys, Marcus Haynes and Thomas Incoom getting involved in the mix a little bit. Denver, I think, is in a pretty good spot right now, but you have to keep monitoring it. Can everybody stay healthy? That's the biggest hope here for the Broncos. But Broncos Country, that'll wrap up today's episode of the show here today following Saturday's practice the Centura Health Training Center. Make sure you tune in on Monday for a brand new episode of Locked On Broncos as Sayre and myself, we talk about players who before training camp even began, we highlighted as needing to have a big camp. Are they having a big camp? Who's meeting the bar? Who's not? We'll dive deep into that on Monday's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. I want to be on the Turbo team.